You are listening to Bridging the Gap, the podcast where we talk about businesses going global with the help of localization.
Stay tuned to meet the marketing, product, and software experts that make brands international and learn strategies to speak your customer's language.
Hey, how are you, Jan?
Hey Marta, I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to meet our guest today, who happens to be a Spanish person, and I didn't even know in the beginning because she doesn't really have an accent. Some Spanish people have an accent when they speak in English, and it was quite fun to find a fellow Spaniard.
So it's not that common to meet people who don't have accent if they're not native.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think that people in Spain at least have a very prominent accent in comparison to English. In other languages, I guess it's easier to do the translation, but from Spanish to English, the accent is very prominent most of the times.
mhm.
I don't know if that's your experience with Czech and Polish, because I know you speak
Yeah,
Polish.
I guess like having a partner that speaks the other language really helps because you can really absorb the fluency and actually like the different nuances. And they like my experience with Polish is pretty much the same. After a couple of years, you start sounding really like a native because partially, if you're living in the country, you start to be a native.
Right. It's that simple. Yeah, every little bit help us as well. I think that if you get like to work with people in English, it's just a matter of time that you just switch to a more native accent. But anyway, what I wanted to talk to you about today, Dan, before our guest joins in, is AI workflows. They're all the hype right now. We were wondering how does this affect translation? I don't know if you have any starting thoughts about them before we dive into the conversation.
I think we should start slightly with some translation history, like the history of machine translation and where it all started.
Hmm.
Of course, like the neural networks are here for a while with us. Like people back then, people treated translation basically like an input-output process, and that changes a lot with AI because it's able to understand some context and adjust the translation as we go. And this like fundamentally changes the way people think about translations. So it's not just about translating stuff, but it's more about how do we focus on the important bits? How do we know that the translation is actually any good and things
Hmm.
like that? And I think that mm, AI and specifically AI workflows can help us focus on the important bits and save us a lot of time when we deal with translations. So we can actually like
Hmm.
use the people's resources to actually like focus on the important things first.
I 100% agree. I think it's all about context. Like, if you want to get better quality, you just need context, and the workflows can provide that. But who better to tell us that Julia Díez, which is our guest today? She's a software engineer, she's a localization specialist, and she has more than 20 years of experience in the field. So I'm sure she has a lot to say about the evolution of machine translation and localization. Hello, Julia. How are you?
Hi, Marta. Hi, Jan. How are you?
Hello.
We are doing good. We are kind of going into the final steps of our second season, so this is exciting. This conversation had to be had. How are you doing? Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so first, congratulations on your second season of podcast. My name is Julia. I'm a software engineer working in localization and internationalization, probably with a special background because I have a background in linguistics too, which probably is what tells me apart from other colleagues that works with me in the profession. Normally we have our linguists or engineers, and I have like background in linguistics and also engineering. I work both in internationalization with the dev teams and also helping the localization team. So a little bit covering, as they say here, like wearing many hats.
That is exciting. Yeah, really, really interesting background. And I think like it really helps to always blend like two different disciplines to actually like find your own niche. And this is exactly the case. So excited to have you. And let's see what we have to talk about. We were already mentioning AI and agentic workflows, so we'll probably get to that.
Yeah.
Let's just start.
We wanted to ask you, Julia, since you have experience in both the software and the linguistic realm, which is not common in this industry, as I said, do you think agentic workflows, which are well the hype right now, are ready to be deployed right now in localization processes, or are they still like in an embryonic phase and we are still not ready for them?
Technically, they are ready. Problem is that the teams are not ready. And the industry is not ready. But technically, 100%, they are absolutely ready. The problem is that the localization industry, it's a little bit messy because of this separation of engineering and linguistics, when really ideally we should have more linguists trained in engineer or more engineers with linguistic awareness. The processes have become really complex, and in order for a agentic solution to work, we first need to simplify the workflows, and it needs to be really clear workflows without silos and without many tools. If you have a lot of tools, the agent is going to find more problems jumping from one tool to the other. And you are going to always need to keep updating protocols or API calls or whatever. While if you have a really simplified workflow, not a lot of tools into the process, an agentic workflow is gonna work very, 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 very well. So I think it's not that the technology is not there, is that there is a lot of previous work that needs to be done in order for a agentic workflow to be implemented. So you need to simplify things before you implement an agentic. So the first thing that teams needs to do is name what's actually creating the drag. That seems easy enough, but it's very difficult, especially as you get teams that keep growing. The drag is probably gonna be human. It's not gonna be technical, and solving human things is more difficult than solving technical things. Actually, there is a theory. I think it was an engineer from IBM a lot of years ago. He's called Brooke. He was always advocating for small teams in engineering. And he was making some drawings. Like, imagine you have a team of 3 engineers, of 3 people. So I'm gonna say, I'm not sure if you see. You see there is it's a triangle, right? There are 3 lines of communication. Now let's imagine you put 4. You have 4. Now you have 6 lines of communication. If you keep adding more people, you are gonna end up with, if you have a team of 12, I don't have the maths on my head, but you are going to have over 70 lines of communication. Anytime you open a line of communication, you open a line for miscommunication too. And the agents needs really clear communication because otherwise they are going to stamp into a wall and they can get stuck. So that's one thing. You need to simplify the workflow. You need to be really like architecting, like have an architect of a really clear and smooth workflow in order to implement an agentic, fully automated system. And then the other thing is that workflow is gonna rely on data, on your data. And in localization, data is very important from your glossaries or probably TMs. But not only that, also things like a string ID that is clear and unique. That's very important, and it doesn't happen. Or having a visual context, that's the final visual context. There's not any last minute edit from design, these kind of things. So the data needs to be perfect and clean, and your workflow needs to be really simple, ideally with very few people involved and very few tools involved. And so those 2 things, I don't think they are there in the industry. I don't think they are there in any company, I would say, very few companies. And those are the things that you need to solve. If you have like contaminated data, your AI is going to be very good at giving you a contaminated response. And if you have a workflow that's really messy, that's not clear, that it depends each time, like it's not always the same, then agentic AI is probably be an overhead, and it's going to be an extra cost, and it's not going to give you good results. So those are the two things that people, if they want, like, you need to ask yourself if you want agentic AI. Maybe you don't want it, you don't need it. I should have started there. Ask yourself, is AI gonna do better than what you have now, like a more manual process? First, ask that question. If the answer is yes, you want to go for agentic AI, then you need to design a workflow that is really simple, and you need to have extremely clean data. But the technology is there 100%. It's absolutely
Wow.
there.
Yeah, so you mentioned some issues people are facing even before they started, like tackle localization. It's like a common let's say diseases of a team. Yeah, it's a really good point that people should probably start there. Do you have maybe some tips? What are some, like some ideas what people can do today to actually start moving into the direction you mentioned?
So first ask the question if you really want, maybe I need to explain something that is going to help people a lot. So you have different usages of AI right now. One of the main differentiations is, like, you can, for example, use a custom GPT. I'm going to use GPT, but it could be any other AI tool, but I think is the most well known, right? So you can make a custom GPT, you can make an action GPT, or you can make a fully automated system. And those are different ambitions, different level of ambition with introducing AI. I would say, I believe many leaders, and I talk about leadership in companies like board of management, they want eventually to get to a fully automated system. That's what in all honesty, what I think they want, looking into the future. We as humans can feel in the like this is too robotic or whatever, but if I am like talking about how I see reality, I think that's their goal, to get to a fully automated system. But you don't need, of course, probably to start on the last step, because that's complex. Probably there is one differentiation that I don't think people has really clear in their mind yet, because there is a lot of information coming every day about agentic AIs. Is that there is a difference between automation and AI. Automation, it's in teams for many, many years already with different levels of success. And the problem is there are many people, they market tools and everything is AI powered now, right? I would say any campaign that you see for any company is going to be AI powered. And I think that creates a lot of confusion in people as to what is AI and what is automation. So automation, it's about rules. It's engineering to create for rules, and it needs to be clear, and it follows a repeatable logic. So it needs to be something that always repeats itself. And that's automation. It has nothing to do with AI. Automation is around for many, many years. And then AI is all about interpretation. So it interprets a messy input. It can be text, it can be even images. We know that right now it's multimodal. And then it generates a response based on patterns. So when we talk about a fully automated system, normally we are talking about a hybrid that combines automation with AI. But as I said, this is like the final goal for many companies, but there are a lot of problems that you need to start solving before. So the first thing that I would recommend is fill the gap on AI literacy. If you want your employees to work with a AI copilot from now on, or to manage fully automated systems based in AI, they need to start learning about AI as soon as possible. They can, for example, start to use custom GPTs in their daily task. Custom GPTs or action GPTs are really easy tools to use right now. You don't need to be an engineer, I think, even for using those tools, and you can use them on an individual basis. Probably for your daily tasks, they are more than enough. For example, what can we do with a custom GPT? I could provide him my style guide. I could provide him my glossary, my approved glossary. I could provide features availability market, so which features are available in each market. And then I could provide my source file that I need to translate. And I could ask her to send me a report of source readiness. We do a lot of source reviews in localization. So a custom GPT could do that. If we go to an action GPT, which is also available with the Pro subscription in GPT, is like a custom GPT, but then it is able to do an action. So in my end, my custom GPT does the source review analysis for me. And then I say, generate a report. And with the action GPT can say, when you have your report, open Slack and send a message to the linguist channel. And let them know that this feature, system analysis, is not available in their market. They should reformulate it or whatever. Those two options, like a custom GPT or an action GPT, are extremely simple tools that are available for everybody that teams could start to use individually already, and they should start to build an app knowledge on AI. I did study data science and AI. It was a 4 months course, I think. It was 4 months or 6 months, not even a year. So I get a really good foundation, and I would advise everybody to start doing courses on AI just to get the good foundation of how everything works. So for the companies, that would be the first thing. And of course, the companies should pay or help their employees with this transition. In my case, I got part of my studies money back from my company because they understood that that was going to be good for their department. The department is going to benefit that I know about data science and AI because I can now apply it. So that's one thing that the companies can do. Not only tell them like train yourself, but actually facilitate and really help them to train themselves. Other than that, you maybe don't need to go to there are a lot of incredible free courses on AI out there. There are loads of them, or courses in Coursera that are maybe 20 euros. I think anybody that is working can pay 20 euros for a really good course. So that's the first thing. If you expect people to be able to make this transition, you need to make sure these people can make the transition. And if they don't know about AI and they don't use AI daily, even as a custom or an action GPT, it's really hard that you are gonna change how things work in your department. Actually, like the hardest thing for the implementation of AI in companies is actually the changing of mindset and breaking processes, because all of the companies, we build processes for a world that doesn't exist anymore. And it's really hard for a team that's been working really hard for 20 years, and that for 20 years they have been building processes, they have been building workflows that were really efficient a year and a half ago, that suddenly that's not efficient anymore. And to tell that to a person that has put a lot of their time and their brilliant mind into it, changing a team is hard. That's the hardest thing in a team, to implement change. Like when people get used to do something in a certain way, it's really hard to break that. So that's why I know for sure that the newly created companies are going to have a competitive advantage, because the newly created companies are going to have AI from the beginning, from scratch into all of the processes, while the longest standing companies are going to find it much harder to break their processes and implement new design. If that happens, this is going to come from leadership that is going to say, we throw all of this to the bin, sorry for that, and now we need to design a new one.
Yeah,
because if I even
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, absolutely. Like that's super helpful, and I like that you mentioned this, that you basically need to step outside of the box and start with the education. Otherwise, you won't be able to keep up. I believe that education is really important, but if we take a look at what the current state is, like not everyone can have the opportunity to work on a green field and a new company. Many people are basically like stuck in old systems. I think that to be able to move fast and experiment, like you already mentioned it at the beginning, that splitting into smaller teams might be really useful to actually get your own space to try out things. I was just wondering, like, how do you deal with the problem, like splitting into small teams to move fast versus like creating silos, you know?
So yeah, I've seen these firsthand. Localization, even before AI, like a bigger team doesn't mean higher quality. In localization, I think what you need is a lot of commitment, because localization never stops. You are getting always new translation from different teams, from software teams, from marketing teams, from legal teams. You need to make sure that everything it's like working together, and that all the terminology is respected together in all across the companies. But what you need is commitment, and very few people, like I would say, like a small team that is really committed, and of course that can rely on a nice network of collaborators, being linguists or QAs or whatever. Then it needs to build a lot of correct relationships with the teams. It needs to be embedded into the teams, embedded into development teams, into product, into marketing. Otherwise, what is happening, and I've seen it a lot, is that the other teams, so development teams, marketing teams, they don't know anything about localization. They don't think with a global mindset at all. They only think normally US centric, but it could be Chinese centric if the company was Chinese, whatever. So they just think on their local market. And then they throw everything to localization. And then in localization, you create more intermediaries. And at the end, you have a lot of intermediaries. And the moment it reaches the linguist, which is really the person that needs to translate and adapt the message, you have a lot of hands in the middle, a lot of communications. And when it gets to the point, like someone raises, like we have a blocker because internationalization blockers or whatever, it is like too late to fix it, because if you want to move this defect up the chain of all of the persons that has been involved in getting the file to the linguist, there is no time. The release is there. So that's what I've seen so many times. While if you try to have the requester as near as possible as the person that needs to do the job, in this case a linguist, even if you in the middle make an empty draft or whatever, but the linguist is going to have the last yes or the last validation. That works much better, because if you find a problem and you don't have that many intermediaries, you still have time to take action. And that's what I've always advocate, and I actually implemented this in my team, that we cannot have everything sent out to a vendor and then another PM in the vendor side, because by the time it gets to the linguist, 2 days have passed, and then the linguist pass by to the PM, and then the PM needs to do some checks. And I advocated, and I actually implemented for the high locales, and I hope I can implement it for the rest of locales, that my team has direct contact with a linguist. Like every day we have direct contact with a linguist. I don't want an intermediary with me and the linguist. I need to be able to ask questions. I need to be able to hear, to listen their doubts and their questions. And because if we identify the blockers really fast, you can straight away solve them with the dev teams or the marketing teams. It is hard because it's been that's how localization industry has grown in many companies. Is not like that. In many companies, it has grown with teams that were becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and that they were relying in their turn in external vendors that then have their PMs. So I'm gonna go back to the beginning. It's not about that the technology is not there. The technology is there. The problem is we as humans have made localization extremely complex. It shouldn't have been that complex. It should have been much streamlined and smoother. And one of the reasons why we have made this complex is because they're ironically, in localization, there has not been the correct communication between people that didn't speak the same language. So the engineers speak one language and the linguists speak a very different language. And the PMs are in the middle, and at the end of the day, some of them don't understand the linguists and don't understand the engineers. So I have seen situations where it seemed like it was, the game of the broken telephone. You tell something to someone and the next one tells something. So I've seen situations in my professional life, like I was sort of laughing, like the message is lost.
So just to summarize, you gave us pretty much detail on the problem. I see that you have a lot of experience with this, but just to summarize what you just said, you suggest to actually create small teams to actually move fast, but streamline to communication, like focus on the communication, maybe flatten the structure a bit to get rid of any middlemen, or just make it that simple for people to communicate.
Yeah, and also something very important is if your source is correct and doesn't have problems, your problems won't multiply in the target. But many people don't pay enough attention to the source in terms of internationalization problems, but also naming of features that are not available, or glossary terms that are not identified and they are not curated into the glossary, even errors in the source itself. So many people don't pay enough attention to the source. I think in localization, you can prevent problems, or you'll be chasing bugs for the rest of your life. And that's the best advice that I can give anybody that works in localization. Go prevent the problem. Don't try to fix it once it has happened, because when it has happened in over 30 locales. And when it has happened over 30 locales, it has happened to the linguist, but then you need to also reach the PM in the middle, and then you need to bring it up to the engineer to solve. I was making a calculation and solving a typo in a software product, just a typo, okay? Just a typo. The cost could be almost 400 euros in engineering hours. Yes, because you need to take the localization engineer, needs to make a translation kit, needs to send it outside, needs to pass to the PM. The linguist need to confirm that's a typo, it needs to correct. You need to put it back in. The localization engineer needs to take the file out of the translation memory, needs to reach the developer on the core dev, needs to open a pull request. So those are engineer hours. And an engineer hour is really expensive in a tech company. So that's why the best advice that I can go is prep your jobs. Do some preparation of your jobs. Prevent the issues. Spend the time preventing the issues instead of trying to fix bugs. That's the best advice that I can give, and I think that's not happening as it should in many places. Source review, I probably should create a post on Substack about source review. There are like 6 to 10 things that you need to check on a source review, covering both internationalization and more content issues. And if you have a correct source review and you have the correct visual context given to the linguist, you are probably not going to introduce bugs at all if your linguists are senior enough, like they have enough experience. If the source is correct and they have the visual context, I can see very, very, very few reasons why a linguist would introduce a bug. But if the source is not correct, it is full of internationalization issues, and you don't have the visual context for the linguist, then those bugs are gonna live in your software forever. It's so, and source review again, AI can be really helpful for source review. Yeah.
I imagine this problem is already existing in many companies because localization was kind of implemented as a last minute thought. So right now, how do you think AI can help these teams review their sources and make sure that anything is not creating this kind of ball problems, that never end?
I think many companies are now like training the dev teams on internationalization because they there is a lack of awareness. And then another problem we have is that the dev teams are not fixed. Engineers tend to especially good engineers, change job I would say every 3-5 years, probably they move to a higher position. So you train a team and then the team changes and then you need to train a team again. And that is a problem that we have. And actually now I'm working on an internationalization scanner that is actually using AI. And basically how hopefully it's going to work, I'm still testing it, is that you just drop a file and it will just scan for internationalization issues. And it just gives you a report like these sentences are concatenated, this variable is not going to work for translation for whatever reason, or you have plurals, but you don't have the correct plural syntax for supporting the languages. So, for example, my personal work is I'm trying to create tools where people can just through their files and get the report on internationalization issues or on market availability issues, whatever. Sort of like in the minute. They don't need to wait for a source review. That's also gonna speed up things. It's gonna educate because with AI, it can give them an explanation on why they need to solve that. And it's gonna free a lot of my time. It's gonna make my life really nice if I happen to make it work. Otherwise, it's like a never ending. You train a team, then another team comes, a new team comes, you need to train again. So you need to find a way. I've talked about this in some posts. You cannot rely on Julia that knows engineering and knows linguistics. This is really dangerous for a company to do. You cannot rely on one individual that you find. You need to create a system. You need to create a system that no matter who is there, because maybe tomorrow I win the lottery, and I go to live to Caribbean, I don't know. What you need to solve things is like no matter what individual is there, things are gonna keep working. It shouldn't be based on specific persons, So I think what we are trying to do is to create tools that can solve the problems for themselves and that they can create this sort of analysis that are needed in localization in an autonomous way.
Well, this is a technical problem, but related to humans, you were talking about how there's kind of a strange relationship between the language of engineers and the language of localization professionals or linguists. You have mentioned previously that there's like a figure that you advocate for, which is the localization architect. So, is there a way we can also start reshaping our teams and the localization jobs we are actually offering to people in these teams?
Yeah, probably. I think how I see it, I might be wrong. It's hard for me to talk about this because, every week there is a new thing and everything is changing really, really fast. But where we stand today, what I advocate for is you have one language lead per each of the markets. That person for me needs to be more than a linguist. So their job should be more like a market owner of brand market owner, something like this, if this makes sense. Their job is not going to just be translate, because great part of the translation is going to be done automatically, and of course they can then proofread it or whatever, but we already function in such a way that we create drafts with MT and we do quality assurance with MT, and then the human just do the final touch against the visual context. We work with really senior linguists. In many locales, the edit rate is just 10%. So that means that 90% has been done correctly by the train engines that we have. That's very good. Before, a translation kit for a software product was take us a week and a half, sending, waiting, coming back, review, and now it's same day. So we are from a week and a half to the same day. So that means that I never advocate for eliminating the linguist, because I think they are the really important person for making localization work, and I always actually defend them a lot. But I do think they need to to be more ambitious on what their roles will entail. So now translation should take you just 1 hour a day, because we are going to do the rest for you. We are going to do the source reviews for you. We are going to give you the perfect source. We are going to give you the perfect visual context. We are going to give you a draft which has the glossary already correct, because machine translation correctly trained with a correct glossary is more consistent than a human translator in terms of glossary consistency. So we are giving you a lot so that you can, of course, give the final touch, but that final touch, instead of 10 hours of doing everything from scratch, is going to take you 1 hour. So now, what are you going to do with the rest of the time? It's like we are going to either hire you part-time, or you need to give more. And that maybe means like messaging, adapting, like do research of your market, create marketing headlines from scratch, not just translating or not transcreated, but really create a new campaign, like what we call hyper localization, like hyper adaptation for the market. So you are going to also become some sort of a marketing specialist. Our linguists do a lot of QA tasks of software too, so they don't only translate. They become, I call them language owners in McAfee. So it's a language owner. It's not just a translator anymore. And they are gonna do a lot of different tasks. Also, a lot of tasks for data sanity checks. In AI, the most important thing that a company has, other than clear and streamlined processes, is their data. For many companies, the reality of their TMs and their glossary is not looking good. So the linguist needs to be like the owner of the data. They need to make sure that everything is correct. They need to make sure the TMs are clean. They need to make sure the glossary is clean. And that's how I see the transformation of the linguist. It's not going to just be, so the model that you are just a translator, that's the only thing you do. I don't see that's going to be the case for many people, to be honest. At least if they just work for one company. I mean, if they want to be translators and work for many, many, many companies, maybe they can still do it. But within, for one company, I don't think there is room anymore for you are just a translator and that's it.
Yeah, but to me that's a good thing actually. Like no one wants to sit for 8 hours at desk and do the monotonous work, like boring, like repeated translations.
For me, it's a super good thing. There's, I think, a lot of emotion around this in the linguist space. But for me, I see it like it will give you a lot of creativity. Another use case that we do with AI is like from one English blog, we analyze it, and then we take what's the main keywords, the main subject, but then we readapt it for the new market. So it's something much more creative that actually makes you more like a writer than just a translator. And for me, it's a super good thing. But of course, you need to be a little bit open-minded. You need to be able to, willing to use AI and willing to explore. There are many people that the moment you mention AI, especially among the translation community, they sort of put your photo and throw darts at your face, And I think this is going to change. When I started working as a translator a lot of years ago, I lived the transition from using a dictionary, like a physical dictionary, into using a translation management systems. We all had Trados on our computer. We started to have Trados on our computer. The debate was, some translators said Trados was the enemy and you shouldn't use it. That debate had already happened. Many people wanted to do everything manually in Word without translation memories. And right now, nobody would argue, even the linguist, nobody would defend that the translation memories are not needed. Everybody know that they are needed for consistency purposes. So I think it's the same on every new change of paradigm. There is going to be a lot of voices that are going to take longer to adapt. And I understand it also because maybe imagine you are like 60 years old, you are near the end of your career, and you are tired and you don't want to change how you work, at this point of time, it's like, again, now I need to change again. But what can I say? I mean, it's happening and it's here.
Yeah. Are you actually proving the results? I'm still impressed by the 10% edit rate. Like that's pretty impressive. That's really good. Yeah.
Just to say, not in all locales.
Yeah. Anyway.
There's a big difference between locales here on the machine translation. Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, like it proves that it's possible,
Yeah. And also, like, now we have with RAG is improving. We have different types of RAG, and now we have a RAG that is going to be able to take into account also visual reference. So that's going to be a game changer too. Because before, the problem is, like, imagine you have canceled your account, but if you don't have the visual reference, you don't know if it's a title or if it's a bottom. That's the typical thing that even a human linguist gets wrong if they don't have the visual. But now with new forms of RAG, you are going to be able to give the visual too. So it's going to be able to reason where it appears within the visual context.
Yeah, so it again boils down to the problem of having the data clean and having everything in place so you can actually leverage those kind of automations.
Yeah. And that's the hardest. Like,
before we go, Julia, I wanted to ask you, I know we don't have like a fortune, we are not fortune tellers, but we don't have a crystal ball. And as you said, everything is changing so rapidly, but I already see that the agentic workflows are being more context aware, like the example you just mentioned. So how do you predict the landscape is going to change, like in the next few years? What do you see happening? And what are the things that teams are going to have in place, systems in place, mentality in place to adapt to these rapid changes?
I see two scenarios. Some companies won't adapt. I think some companies won't adapt, and probably they are gonna use just a tool of AI here and another little tool of AI there. And I think the competitive advantage is going to be for the newly created companies. That's I have zero doubts about it. For the rest, it can happen that in-house terms might shrink a little bit. I think that's a possibility, but you are going to see more like architects, people using like just guiding the agentic workflow, which is going to be the one doing all of the steps of the localization process. And then just when everything is ready, the linguistic owner for me is still there always, because it's the one that needs to give the final validation. It's the one that needs to curate the assets. Someone will need to curate the assets if the assets are not correct. So I see linguistic owners, but probably as external vendors working a certain amount of hours a day. And then I see like probably 3-4 people working, one as the architect, and maybe the architect is just hired for architecting an external, it can be like a consultant. It can be like a really experienced consultant that just do the architecting. And then you just have your 3. If you want to follow Brooks, keep it in 3. So you have only 3 lines of communication, but potentially 4, depending on the size of your company, that they are sort of just like supervising the agentic workflow. But as I said, in which companies this will be a reality and in which it's not going to be a reality, it's really hard to know. But I know that for many long-standing companies, it's going to be really hard to get rid of their dependencies. They have dependencies with many things, many tools, many people. Yeah.
Yeah, we know that. Yeah. Thank you so much for the sum up. and it's definitely an exciting place to be in right now. Before we wrap up this podcast, can you just share where can people follow your work if they want to learn more? You mentioned some articles during our talk. Maybe people want to dig in a little bit deeper.
So I am building a newsletter in Substack, which is called Build Local, Shape Global. Or if you look for Julia Díez, I guess you'll find it. Many posts are free. I do have some paid subscriptions where I guess I do more deep dive into workflows or AI use cases. But many posts are also free for checking them. And actually, I am using my Substack sort of to document my experimentation with AI. That's how I use it. It's sort of a support I'm using, like, okay, I'm going to experiment with this, and I just document it in Substack.
Mm-hmm. We will gather all the resources you have mentioned in the description box. So please, to the audience, please look at it. And we will see each other in the next episode of Bridging the Gap. Thank you, Julia, for being here with us and for
Thank you guys.
For your insights.
Yeah, thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing, and I'm excited to read more from you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay. See you soon. Bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
If you like this episode, please follow our channel and add it to your favorites so you don't miss the next conversation. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube for updates and bonus content. Until next time, stay curious.